This is Blackstone Joe, and you're listening to Slick Talk.
If I say I'm an oil man, you will agree.
There's the stink of oil about him.
Hello and welcome into episode 123. Again, I am your host, Blackstone Joe, and I'm glad you're here. I'm also glad to report that I'm not flying solo on this episode. I have a guest with me, first one in a while, and that would be Justin. We spend a lot of time talking about the report writer side of things on this show, and for good reason. That is what I do. However, it's far from the only thing occurring in these walls. Naturally, I can only write a report if I have the data to do it with. And as acting lab manager, Justin is as important as they come in the business of delivering the data to the report writers so we are able to tell you what's going on in your engine. I was lucky to be able to pull Justin away from the lab for a little bit because as I talk about how busy we are on the report end of things, you can imagine they're just as busy in the lab obtaining those results. But I was able to sit down with Justin for a while, chat about the lab, how he works it, the intricacies of running such an operation, and a lot of it was new to me because, as you can imagine, we don't have an opportunity to gain as much insight on that end of the business. No matter how hard we try, it's always another report to write, another email to send, another call to make. We always enjoy reaching out to customers, but having time to learn more about what goes on in these walls benefits not only you, the listener, but us. So we know exactly what it takes to provide the data that allows the writer to produce the best report in the game. You'll learn all about that and more in this talk with Justin. So without further ado, here's Justin and I in studio. Okay. I do know our pictures are right next to each other on the About.
Yeah.
On the About page.
Yeah.
The People of Blackstone page, which is kind of a good place to start. So you have one of those bios that clearly says, like, this person didn't want to write a bio, so Kristen had to write one. Working in the lab is described as what you do.
Yeah.
What would you say you're doing when you're quote unquote working in the lab? Break it down a little bit for people that don't know you.
Pretty much anything and everything. Anything that comes into the lab most likely will pass right through me, or I'll have something to do with it.
So as far as the samples arrive in the lab, you're going to be in charge of taking them from point A to point B, running the tests.
Point A to point B, running the test, getting them distributed throughout the lab to do the different tests, and some specialty testing with them too. And
yeah, because people don't realize a lot of the time we don't just do motor oil.
Yeah, do anything really. I mean, we get coolants, brake fluids.
Just don't send us your water unless it's specifically in the form of coolant.
Yeah, we have had I believe it's called brown water.
Yes.
Before with some a gentleman had drove his BMW through some grass and some water had splashed up onto his car.
Yes.
And he went and sampled that water, sent it in to us, and we found out that it was actually from like an RV dump spot. So he drove his car through some waste, got it on there.
He sent waste?
Yeah. Yeah, there was mosquito larva in it.
Was he just hoping that we could tell whose waste it was?
That or to tell whether it would screw up the paint on his car or something, probably.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I mean, I've come across some pretty wild stuff, but that's got to be at the top of the list.
Yeah, you see a lot of wild stuff in the lab usually.
One thing I'm curious about from your perspective in the lab, when you go from, say, I guess this would be hard to tell on your end sometimes, but from the writer's standpoint, we're looking at Toyota. Oh, here's a sample from a Deister vibrating screen. Can you tell when you're running samples, either say you're doing viscosities one day, we see obviously a whole different lineup of data, but when you're running it, can you be like, oh, well, this changed. All of a sudden I went from measuring stuff that looks like a typical gasoline or diesel engine oil, and then what does it look like on your end when you suddenly jump to something that might be from an industrial application?
With the industrials, it immediately takes us longer because it is thicker.
Mm-hmm.
It is it's less likely to catch on fire. It's less volatile because it has to be in an industrial setting and everything. There's a lot of safety stuff that goes on with that. So I mean, we're doing normal flash points, might be going 400 degrees, 430, stuff like that, and then all of a sudden we get one that goes to 515.
Yeah.
And
the wait time on a 515.
Yeah, I mean, you can try to warm those cups up as fast as you want to, but there's only so much heat that they'll absorb at once. So, and going with viscosities too. I mean, we're doing 12 viscosities at once in our tank, and we'll have a wide variety of one. I might have one in the back that maybe only goes for 1:20, and then one in the front that's going for 6 minutes.
Yeah.
So we're going through there, sucking all the samples up and everything, waiting for them to drop down. And yeah, you'll see those ones, they'll sit there and they'll start moving slower, and then it'll be like watching paint dry for a little bit.
Yeah. From the rider position, when I first load a batch, I'll look through the data. Just because we should, we want to look at the check standards and see what is going on. But it's also a preview of what I'm dealing with as far as what I'm about to write, because I'll look at the data and be like, oh, okay, here's almost no metal and a bunch of phosphorus. I'm like, well, all right, I might be having an easy start to my day with a lot of turbine oils, and those are, quick write. So in that sense, I get a little bit of a preview, and I can obviously flip through the batch real quick on the report page. Do you get any way of looking ahead when you're doing setups and you're like, okay, I'm going to have a different process, or is it all just flying by the seat of your pants and you don't know?
It's a lot of flying by the seat of your pants. I mean, sadly it is, but I mean, when we are doing setups, we do take the samples, we shake them up, we take the lids from the samples, we turn them upside down on a really strong magnet, and we wiggle it around on that. And usually we can see if there's any sort of ferrous debris, it will start to stand up and everything. And sometimes I will grab a sample, and if it looks like a normal engine or whatever, I'll go to shake up the sample before I set it up, and I can tell immediately whether that has a lot of gas in it. Just because, I mean, I can tell with a 0W20 and then something that has a lot of gas in it. It just feels more watery and stuff like that. So I can initially see that, and yeah, that will change our testing in like the flash point, because we won't be able to put it into the cup at the correct temperature and stuff like that. We would have to put it from a cup that was already like way cooled down and everything, because gasoline, it ignites under normal temperatures. So when we're doing a flash point on that, I mean, it will go right at room temp. Right when we put it up there, it will flash.
Yeah. When you're bringing new people in the lab, one thing I'm curious about is, for writers anyway, we do well at bringing people who aren't necessarily like mechanic types, but who know how to communicate very well. And then we can teach them the mechanics of an engine. Easier that way than vice versa. But what are you looking for when you're bringing someone new into the lab? Because we've had to have a lot more help with the influx of samples. So you're involved in the hiring process. What are you looking for? What makes a good lab candidate?
Being honest, know whenever you've screwed something up, and be willing to own that and everything, and really just multitasking. There's a lot of stuff in the lab, and like I said, we're doing vis 12 at a time, so that's 12 you got to watch, and flashpoints 6 at a time, so that's 6 you have to watch up there. There's a lot of things that you have to keep your eyes on around the lab and everything.
What about a spectral analysis? Because understandably, there's a difference in these tests. Flashes, you have to keep a close eye on when that occurs. Visc is going to drop, and when it drops through the tube, then you record when that happens. Spectral analysis seems like, from my perspective, more of a set it and forget it, in the sense that it's not as hands-on. But clearly there's someone involved in the process. So how would you describe the lab operator's role when it comes to a spectral analysis?
The lab operators are loading up the machines, and then they will basically maintain the machine as it's running. The spectrometers, they do their own calibrations, they do their own checks, and we have a giant screen in the lab that has a program on it where we monitor the condition of every spectrometer that we have. And if something does go wrong, or if it fails a check or something, it will alert the entire lab that something's wrong with that machine.
Are spectrometers temperamental in a particular way?
The newer ones, not so much. It seems as we, move towards the future, they're getting better and better with them to where they're kind of taking care of themselves. But we do get build up on the torches and stuff like that, where we'll have to go in and swap torches and swap pieces of the machine out, tubing, stuff like that. Stuff that just wears as we run stuff.
When I first started, one phrase that kept coming up was that we had a mountain to learn as writers. Was that similar for you? Is that similar for lab operators? Do you feel like there is so much that you have to absorb as far as testing and procedures and what to do, what not to do? That does it seem like it could overwhelm somebody, or is it something that you think is not that way?
It could. It could very much overwhelm someone, but I try not to let that happen to anyone. I will stay with that person on their task whenever they first come in for a couple days until they've got a good grasp on that. And everyone in the lab will work around that person and support that person and make up for what they're not doing until we get ahead and until we're able to confidently push forward with that person.
Right on. Well, good. It's good to get some background, some insight, because things that you'll never learn from writing thousands of reports, you'll still never know exactly like the minutia. And like my lab training was 2 days, which, I was never trained to be a lab operator full time, but still as a writer, spent a couple of days. We were just learning the tests. We weren't so much playing around with the meaningful data.
And we still do that with all the writers and everything. All the writers have at least one day where they will do all the lab tasks.
So on the practical side, I think what spurred my interest in this collaboration here on this episode, I was working on some fuel samples one day, and they were specifically for Blackstone. And I had to go in the lab and take a look at them. I found out that you were taking these. So what was the reason for you taking, specifically, I believe these were diesel fuel samples. Why were you taking them in the first place?
Well, I own a 2015 Volkswagen Passat with the TDI.
Yep.
And I'm a new diesel owner, so I wanted the best fuel possible that I could put into it. And just with our testing that we do in here, I've seen hundreds, if not thousands, of diesel fuel samples. I know right about what the flash point should be, what the specific gravity should be, how much water should actually be in that sample, and how clean it should be also with the PC machine. So,
and whether it's diesel fuel or gasoline, I'm curious, in the past, would you evaluate fuel at all from the owner's standpoint? When you get would you ever say, take a sample that you didn't put in the car and just look at it and see if there's anything wrong visually? Or would you just be like, oh, the car's not running well with that fuel, I won't go back to that gas station? Or what would you do?
Probably the latter, with just how it runs with a gasoline sample and stuff like that. With diesel fuel, you want to get to the pump or the gas stations that are closest to the highway, because those are the ones that are constantly being cycled out, refilled, and everything.
Yeah, that
There's
makes
less
sense.
likely for water or any other contamination to sit there. If you go way out in the country or something and pull into a gas station and get some diesel fuel, that diesel fuel may have been there for 6 months.
Yeah.
And it could be leaching stuff into that tank or something like that. And that's why I was like, well, I've been fueling at the same gas station over and over again since I owned this car. And we started doing some diesel fuel testing in here, and it sparked my interest. And I was like, well, I wonder how much water is actually in my sample or in my fuel that I'm putting in my car. And lo and behold, I sampled it. And
so what was it like in the first sample you took? Did you find anything you did not want to see, or was there anything that surprised you maybe?
The very first sample that I took, I mean, it looked fine. It was clean and everything. But whenever I ran our Carl Fisher test to quantify the water that was in it, it turned out it had 333 ppm particles per million of water in it. And usually, since I see them all the time, normally we get about 50 ppm.
Yeah.
Right
so
around then.
almost no measurable even in parts per million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And once I saw that, I was like, that's a definite red flag for me because, I mean, for the past 6 months or so, I've been testing diesel fuels in the lab, and never once have I had one over 100.
Yeah.
So that was an immediate red flag for me, and then I started going fuel shopping.
Yeah. So did you go to an entirely different station, or did you try like a different pump at that same station, or what was your next move?
Well, I wanted to avoid any like contamination, so I immediately doubted myself on how I took the sample and everything.
Interesting. Okay.
That's something I do a lot, and it's one of my, well, I would say it's a pretty good trait.
So let's start there then. What was your sample technique when you took that first one?
We basically just had a jar that I was just unloading it into there and filling up the jar. And
like one of our plastic bottles, or
no, it was an actual glass jar.
Okay.
That I had washed out here and sealed it all up and everything. And I just had it in my head that maybe I didn't dry it out all the way or something like that whenever I left the lab, or whenever I tightened it up and I sealed that moisture in there or something. So
Okay.
the next time I went out, I mean, I did the same thing, but I actually took a couple jars and I rinsed it out with the diesel fuel, threw that bit out, and then filled it up.
Okay.
Which that I believe was a better practice.
So what do you find in the second sample? Was there not only water, was there anything else that either caught your eye or looked like an obvious issue?
Not really. It was mostly just the water.
Okay.
That was, throwing the red flags up that I really didn't like and everything. Because, I mean, mostly with the car that I have, we have a problem with the fuel pumps. They're rather temperamental. If they get an air bubble or anything into them, they will destroy themselves and just send metal all through the lines, and that's a good $8,000 fix to replace all that stuff.
So at least knowing that you have quality fuel gets you pretty far ahead in the maintenance process as far as that goes.
Yeah.
So you're up to how many diesel fuel samples now?
I probably have about 5 of them now.
Okay.
5 or 6 of them.
And as far as specific gravity, flash point, are those results pretty much in line with what you expect?
Yeah, there was maybe 1 or 2 of them I did a PC sample on, and I believe the cleanliness standard that that's supposed to have out the pump is very, very clean. So any sort of me really messing with it would add to that contamination and stuff. And so I really didn't look too much into that. And plus, with fuel and stuff, it's going to go through a filter before it gets into your engine.
Right.
Anyway, so.
In any of the fuel samples you took, one thing we always keep a close eye on is whether or not there's any visible debris of any kind, black specks, anything. They're too big for our spectrometer to analyze, but did you find anything along those lines? Anything that not necessarily large enough to be in the insolubles test, that would stand out there, but anything floating in samples, debris at the bottom of the container? Because that's something that often can disqualify fuel from the analyst's standpoint.
Yeah, actually, all the samples I had, there was no debris in them or anything like that. They visually looked like normal diesel fuel.
I think that's interesting because even though, you talk about fuel going through filters, and obviously that filter's there for a reason, but it helps me. I guess it makes me feel better about all the times I have to tell people this shouldn't be there. I know that you have a fuel filter, but fuel can in fact be clear and bright. Like it shouldn't have that. So in general, the samples you were looking at, not an issue.
Yeah, not an issue for all the ones that I saw.
And you weren't finding anything as far as like any odd spectral results? Like what do you expect to see when you run a diesel fuel sample in the lab? What do you expect to see number-wise on the spectrometer?
Nothing. I should really see hardly anything in it. We have some sulfur testing that we do for diesel fuels in the lab, but most of the diesel fuel that I get at pumps, they're all sulfur-free anyway and everything. So
So have you extended this beyond diesel fuel to gasoline? Are you looking at that as well for what you put in your other cars, or?
No, not really.
Mm-hmm.
My other gasser car, I mean, I just drive it A to B to work, and
Yeah.
if that thing blows up, I'll just go out and get another one.
Might not be the fuel
Yeah.
then.
Yeah, it might not be the fuel.
Yeah, but switching gears to the oil side, you do have some samples of the used oil from your engines. And the one that's on your About You page on the website, at least I think it started with the 90 Caravan. Do you still have the 90 Caravan?
No, that was actually one of my buddy's cars, and
Mm-hmm.
it was a 1990 Dodge Caravan 5-speed with a turbo.
See, I don't think that's stock.
They were all-wheel drive also.
Wow.
Chrysler actually made a little group of those Dodge Caravans that they put a performance motor in them. They made them
Wow.
all-wheel drive, and they gave them a 5-speed manual transmission, and they're decently quick.
So was that a fully stock motor when it was sampled, do you know, or was it?
Yeah, it was.
Okay.
Yep.
So I remember we had found a lot of metal, a lot of fuel, several areas of concern in that one. Was that sample taken like early on in your Blackstone tenure, or?
Yes. Yeah, it was.
See, I ran into that a lot when I first started here, as far as telling like friends and family about it. I'd be like, "Oh yeah, let me take a sample from your engine," and I would just find the most egregious issues. Then people wouldn't want to talk to me because I kept finding problems in the engine, you know?
Yep.
But as far as your own vehicles, do you use oil analysis to check for, any signs of trouble, any preemptive maintenance?
I'm currently doing my TDI Volkswagen. I'm doing that every, I think it's 5,200 miles. I'm doing oil changes now.
How'd the motor look when you first got it?
Really good. I mean, whenever I first got it, the first sample that I did, I was unaware when the last oil change had happened.
Mm-hmm.
But to the results, it was pretty much half of what our universal averages was.
Oh, wow.
So I determined that it had not been in use for that long at all. With my second sampling, all of them came back up and are right around the averages and stuff. And that's with 5,200 miles on the oil. So, and it's been looking good.
No signs of contamination, anything like that?
Nope. I've even brought in my oil filters and cut them apart and took them underneath the microscope, and I have not found one speck of metal in there.
That's one thing that you're very good at, is a filter inspection. Before Blackstone, did you do anything like that kind of helped you be ahead of the curve?
No, I've always been extremely detail oriented. I spent 10 years in a quality department in a factory.
Yeah, they'll do it.
Measuring stuff down in the micron level. So, I would measure stuff in tenths, and I would have to call things out if they were out more than a tenth.
Yeah.
And everything. So I was always underneath a microscope. I was always with a camera, and I was programming visual CMM machines over there. So I was doing all that, and that helped out really a lot. And I like to get laser focused. And
yeah. So you are able to use that filter analysis as well as the oil analysis on your vehicles.
Yeah.
And do you run into low wear in the engine oil as well as a clean filter? Do they typically go hand in hand for you?
Yeah, they do actually. I've had a little bit more wear on my TDI, but that's because I do a lot of short trips with it.
Right.
So I don't drive that one to work. My wife drives that one, so she only lives maybe a half mile from work, so it gets started up, driven a half mile, and then shut off, that's the worst thing you can do for a diesel.
Yeah.
It needs to get warmed up and everything in order to be the most efficient it can be.
I think it almost surprises people when we tell them that, they'll mention, oh, it's only highway miles. And it's like, they'll kind of say it with an air of concern. And it's like, no, that's the best it can be.
Yeah.
The longer it's running, the better it is from a wear standpoint, usually.
Yeah, as long as it's getting up to temp and everything and all the juices are flowing in the motor, you're good.
All right. Well, whether people are sending in the oil, the filter, or any other specialty sort of test, it sounds like you're the one who knows all as far as the lab side goes. So it's good to have you on the show and also discuss some of the specialty testing, because fuel analysis, I think that's something that is new to a lot of people. So it can help them understand what they can get out of not just an oil report, but whether it's fuel, coolant, etc. So yeah, good stuff, Justin. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, that was a good time. I'm glad you got to hear it. I'm glad I got to be a part of it. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, Justin is a busy man, as am I. But when we have an opportunity to sit down and chop it up, like I said, it's good for you, the listener, I think, to know more about what makes Blackstone tick, but it's an opportunity for me as well to learn more about the lab end of things. Keep in mind that when you send a sample, there is someone to unpack it, someone to set it up for the lab, someone in the lab to obtain the data, and then the writer who is going to produce the report based on all of the steps I mentioned before. We all have to work hand in hand in producing a report that is not only informative, but easy to understand. And now I think after hearing that talk with Justin, it's easy to understand more about what makes Blackstone different and how we do what we do. Thanks for hanging with us. I'm so glad you joined us. If you liked what you heard today, please don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, heck, even share this episode with a friend that you think might be interested in the wide world of oil analysis. This is Blackstone Joe, signing off.
The Slick Talk podcast is powered by Blackstone Laboratories. If you're ready to start your oil analysis journey, visit blackstone-labs.com to order your free test kit.